Welcome to the Momship Mastery podcast, the ultimate destination for moms seeking balance, connection, and growth in their journey through motherhood. I'm your host, master's level therapist and life coach, Andrea Baker. Here at the Momship Mastery, we believe that motherhood is a purposeful journey filled with discoveries, challenges, and countless opportunities, from self-care strategies to relationship building, from spiritual growth to parenting insights. I've got you covered. So, if you're ready to embark on this journey with us, hit that subscribe button and let's explore the world of motherhood, relationships, and growth together. Remember, you're not alone on this journey, and we're here to support you every step of the way. All right, so I want to welcome Amy to the Momship Mastery podcast. Hi, Amy, welcome.
Hi, Andrea. It's wonderful to be here today.
Thank you for coming. You bring such a broad perspective that I believe our listeners will have a very easy way of really connecting to. So I want you to just take a moment to explain who you are, what you do, and we'll get right into it.
Absolutely. So, my name is Amy Stone, and what I do is I mentor and I coach step parents and adults in blended families. And what that means is that I provide strategies and tools and a safe space for people who are engaged in step parenting, or they're in a family where you might call themselves a bonus parent.
Mhm.
They might be unsure of their spot in the family or what to do about it. They might be unsure who to ask for support. And that's when I step in. I have been a step parent for over 25 years. My stepkids are grown. They were young when I met them. And so I've been there. I haven't had all of the experiences. I'm not like the guru who knows all of the answers, but I have a lot of options to give people and places to talk about it and suggestions for things to try
Yeah.
to help people walk through it. What I do.
Wow. Yeah, I can only imagine. I really jumped into this conversation just because I know that motherhood it has complexities in itself. So when you add in a bonus family, when you add in other children and other grown-ups, I know what that's like from the therapist standpoint, from as a therapist and how to navigate that in a therapeutic way. But I don't have that experience, and I really just wonder, what do people get wrong when trying to help a mom who is newly in a blended family or who is transitioning into a blended family?
That's a really great question. I'm not a therapist. I worked with therapists. We did premarital counseling before we got married.
Hmm.
My husband's kids were doing therapy as a result of the separation, which is sometimes
Hmm.
recommended where I live. So they're all big believers. We worked with therapists moving on and so on and so forth. And I have a controversial thought about it based
Okay.
on my experience, which is that it can be super helpful. And the therapists that I work with, there are many things that they taught me that really paved the way. But
Hmm.
after working with the same therapist for several years, we were back to work on some marital stuff. And I learned that the person I was talking to didn't have experience in a family with remarriage or as a step parent. And it was a pivotal moment because we all admitted that many of the things he had offered to me in the beginning had actually been problematic because he didn't
Wow.
have the life
Hmm.
experience of knowing what those suggestions would create in my house. Families, so just families, and a similar thing can happen when you have a young therapist or a young social worker who is in a position to make advice for somebody who's in a situation they haven't had
Hmm.
experience with. If you're a mom and you have experience with a busy house, or you've been a mom and you walk into somebody's house and it's messy, you might make a different starting
Hmm.
point guess than
Hmm.
if you're 24 and you've never had
Never
to try
experienced
and
it.
keep a house
Uh-huh,
clean while you've got the flu.
exactly.
Right? It's just this different perspective. You might start from a different place that's like, hey, what's going on? Instead of, oh, this is out of control.
Yeah,
And so
it's
families are
definitely.
so complex. And so I call this the hill I might die on, which is that it's very important for people to ask their helpers what
Hmm.
their experience is. And that's a tough thing in the therapy world because some therapists really do protect their personal boundaries,
Yeah.
which is absolutely fair. Advice that I got that is still given today
Mm.
in many therapeutic settings was to step back
Mm.
and really defer to the biological parents with the things that were
Mm.
happening in my house.
Wow.
And there are times where that makes a lot of sense. There are times where that's absolutely the thing that I would still do
Mhm.
today. But the thing that can also happen, and this is the number one complaint of new step parents, is that you are inadvertently creating a second class adult in that family
Mhm.
structure.
Yeah.
And the new adult feels like they are disempowered.
They
They don't
lose
know
their
what their
voice.
role
Yeah.
is. They lose their voice.
Yeah.
They call it outsider syndrome.
Mm.
And then they reach out for help and people are like, "Oh, the solution is you need to step back some more. Go
Wow.
create this happiness and in other places in your life. Leave the house, pick up some hobbies, do all those things." And in my personal experience, I remember looking at my therapist and being like, "That's not the experience I
Right.
want. If that's what this is, that's not what I want." And instead, I went another way and we worked on creating a family where I was a component, not
Exactly.
a replacement mother figure,
Exactly.
but involved in the things that were going on in my house.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, I understand how that can come about. Definitely. Because like me I'm a marriage and family therapist. So
Right.
my training was specifically in the complexities of family roles and how to really navigate that space. But I have colleagues who are not and who will like ascribe to that type of information and things like that. And it's just really, it's so strange to me how that information could be given as a way of coping or surviving, and it's that's not what you're here
Right.
for, right? You're here because you want a better quality of life, and that's like you said, that's not what you pictured, that's not what you want. So what did you picture going in? What is the expectation, and then how did you have to alter that in the reality?
So that is one of my favorite questions because the truth is, I didn't have a picture. And that was part of my issue that I had to go through some of the work to define it. And I admit that openly and freely to people when they ask me about this. I have talked to people
Mhm.
who had a better plan, so to speak.
Mm.
And they said, "Oh, we were really intentional about this and we did all these things." And so I had a concept of what I wanted in terms of the strength of my marriage, that
Mhm.
relationship, but I didn't have the vision to be able to really have forethought what I thought the
Yeah.
family would look like. And so there was a lot of confusion for me. And this is all looking in the rearview mirror, right? Like if you had talked
Mhm.
to me 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to describe it as well. There was a lot of confusion because I knew that I wasn't the experience that I thought it would be, but
Mhm.
I didn't have something that I wanted to work towards. And that is something that, as a mentor and a coach, that is something that I ask people and I suggest to them. I'm like, "Hey, what is it that we're working towards? Like, what is
Right.
the vision? What is it that you
Mhm.
want to create?" Because that is so helpful, right?
Mhm.
If you get in the car and you just drive, you may end up
Right.
somewhere cool, but you don't know. Yeah, I think that's a big piece of the puzzle is defining the
Mhm.
container here. What is the goal? And then for me, the second part was definitely acceptance and making a decision for how I wanted to feel about the fact
Mhm.
that my family did not look like a family on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, right?
Right.
Or in a sitcom on TV.
Mhm.
And that was followed by the realization that so do most other families, right? Those personifications of
Mhm.
family in quotation marks aren't necessarily a good goal, a good objective, because that so many of us don't have that.
Yeah.
And we like releasing that as the target, I think is really helpful.
How is the transition from, okay, we're in a relationship, we're in love, we're wanting to start a life together, and then, all right, now we have to be realistic about us combining our lives together.
There's probably a million different ways to do it, to be honest, right? Like if you went into 1,000 different families, you'd hear 1,000 different, slightly different stories. But one thing that I've discovered is similar between my story and many other people's stories from talking to people, because that was a big part of my like research as I did this, right? I knew my story and I knew my experience.
Hmm.
I didn't know whether or not it would be helpful to other people or whether or not it would
Hmm.
align until I had a bunch of conversations.
Oh,
It's very intense is
right.
the thing that holds through and it often goes in a different sequence. So in my case, I was dating the guy I was going to marry. I didn't know I was going to marry, but I was dating and I didn't meet his kids for kind of a long time. And that's pretty normal. And I think pretty good idea, right? Because the
Yeah,
kids get
definitely.
attached,
Hmm.
the kids increase the investment, emotional investment, right? It's harder to break up with
You're
somebody
right,
once you like the
exactly.
kids are cute and you love them, it's harder. And so then as soon as I met the kids, like very, not immediately, but very quickly after I met the kids, things got very intense because it's
Mm,
almost like things went in a different order. So like in a first marriage, a first time relationship where nobody has kids and nobody's been married before, you date, you get to know each other, then maybe in together and you
hmm.
start sharing some things and learning each other. And then maybe you talk about having kids and then
Right.
you have those like 10 months of getting ready for that and you buy all the furniture, right? And it's like this slow, and then the
Hmm.
baby is there and they sleep for the first 2 weeks, right? And in a blended family, it's like there is a point where I went from being someone who lived by myself
Mm,
to a person who lived with a family part time. So my
mm,
husband was not a full time parent, it was part time. But like
mhm.
all of a sudden, I was like on 3 days a week, we were family. And
Wow.
instead of dating, we were doing family stuff. And
Mm,
so it was really intense. And for the new person, if you don't have kids yet, it's a radical identity
mm.
shift
Wow.
because it's like overnight you go
Yeah.
from single to family.
Mom. Yeah.
I used to call it when I was new to it, I called it my instant family. Like
Mm.
just add
Right.
water, instant. Exactly. So that's the way. And often when I talk to stepmoms who are struggling, first of all, they don't want to admit they're struggling, which I totally
Right.
honor. But
Hmm.
like validating the intensity of the situation can be helpful
Yeah.
because giving a word to the feeling, it's like it's very
Hmm.
intense.
Yeah. How much of this is discussed with the partner? Like, how do you approach conversing to your partner and maintain like the strength of your relationship?
First, you go to graduate school and become a therapist. No, I'm kidding. It is complicated. In my case, I had been divorced and he had kids. And so he had, I don't know, what do we call it? Legacy
Hmm.
issues with that, right?
Right.
Like he
Yeah.
had guilt and he had
Hmm.
emotions, and I wasn't a part of that, right? Now, there's a million different ways that blended families form, and not all of them include divorce.
Hmm.
There's also people who would not necessarily identify as step parents who deal with similar things, like people who are
Okay.
raising friends of their children or
Hmm.
grandparents who are stepping in or aunts and uncles, all those things that happen, right? Like the
Right.
whole allo parenting thing. And so alloparent is that anthropological word that we use
Hmm.
for an
I haven't
adult
heard
who's
that
raising
one.
a kid that they're not biologically connected to, right?
Wow.
And it's been around forever. It's like a super old word, which is one of the reasons I love it because sometimes people say this is a modern problem and I'm like,
No,
actually,
it's not.
it's not. It's people, it used to be really risky to make human beings and there were a lot of people raising other people's kids.
Yeah.
And so it's been around since forever, I think. But in my case, there was divorce, and my husband had self judgment that he was
Hmm.
working through. And I wasn't actually a part of that, but I had to
Right.
live with it. And so there were times, and I just want to be upfront with people. Like when I say I'm not a guru, I'm not like the example of perfection. And this is one of the places where I stepped in the mud, yeah, a lot, and which is how I learned through
Exactly.
trial and error. And it's not what I recommend. Like I can save people a lot of grief by giving them some tips. But if I shared opinions about things that the kids were doing, and remember, I wasn't a parent, or maybe I didn't say that. I
Hmm.
wasn't a parent at the time. I really didn't know. So a
Hmm.
lot of those opinions that I had, I was wrong, right?
Oh.
I thought his kids should be quieter, eat better, have better manners, go to sleep on
Hmm.
time on their own, all the things that young kids don't do, cleaner.
Exactly.
And I was wrong about all of those things, which I learned over time. But sometimes when I brought it up, he would get very protective
Hmm.
of his kids, which
Hmm.
is a really common response, right?
Right.
And actually, you wouldn't want to be maybe in a relationship with someone who wasn't protective of their
Right.
kids. This is a
Yeah.
desirable thing, but it
True.
did take me
Hmm.
some time to learn how we were going to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And those were
Right.
big lessons. And they're going to, if there's people listening who want to, they're like, but what do I do? You're talking about what do I
Right.
do?
Yeah.
You want to separate the issue from your feelings about the people involved. So, and you want to make it very specific to what your experience is. And if I'm struggling with the kids screaming and yelling in the afternoon and it's stressing me out, instead of saying, your kids are too noisy, or your kids need to be
Mm-hmm.
quiet, or they're too loud, you want to say, hey, I'm really struggling with
Mm-hmm.
staying calm with all the noise in the house. And can we work
Exactly. Yeah.
together on changing that? Right. And that's the
Yeah.
tool, right? With all conflict, right?
Yeah.
That's what we teach people with. Yeah. So it works.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really good. That's one of the biggest communication hacks is the I statements, right? Just changing that and switching it. It just does something different to our brains.
It
It helps
does.
us.
The first time they gave me the I lesson, and my first round of I statements was, I think your kids are too noisy. Or I did not, I needed somebody to give me that second lesson. I was like, I am using
I'm
the I
using it,
statements. It's not working.
right?
And they were like,
I love
oh,
it.
you're using I statements, but you're using them wrong. And I was like, I need the advanced course and I need it on fast forward.
That's hilarious. Oh man. So you've given them some tips on how to navigate that space with the kids, but what about the other adults that are in the picture? How
The
do we
extended
navigate?
family, yeah.
Hmm. How do you
Those
navigate?
it depends on the person, right? And it depends on the situation. The overall thing that I suggest to people, there's two parts of it, which is honoring and respecting the
Hmm.
relationships that were present before you
Hmm.
were a part of the group, right? Because they were there, right?
Hmm.
The other thing is trying really hard to allow the people in the family, and this is the adults, the kids, the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, the crazy Uncle Fred, all the people, to be who they are
Hmm.
and just allow them to be that, right? Because a
Yeah.
lot of times the stress comes for when a vision of how you want somebody else to be, and they're just not. And it's not easy.
Hmm.
I'm not going to say that it's easy. If you've got so the buzzwords that people use are the high
Hmm.
conflict divorce and the high
Hmm.
conflict spouse. And so if you've got a situation where somebody is really high conflict,
Hmm.
pretending that they're not or dreaming that someday they won't be is probably not ever going to get you to where you want to go.
Yeah.
It starts with the fact that it's, oh, this is really high conflict. And then once you acknowledge that this is what this is, maybe you can start taking action to where do you want to go from there. I
Right.
was very fortunate in my own personal
Okay.
experience. I'm going to say I was very fortunate that the divorce was fairly civil. As civil
Okay.
people do not get divorced because they're happy, but they had decent communication. There was not a lot of financial stress, which is a really big deal
Hmm.
in how much conflict there is. There were no overarching things like no substance abuse or
Yeah.
misuse. Those things can make things
A
much
bit more
more complicated.
complicated.
Oh, so much more complicated. And so the issues were, so it's like honoring and respecting the relationship that came before. Like my husband married his first wife and they were married for a
Hmm.
bunch of years and they
Hmm.
were a family. My in-laws, one of the most interesting things for me to realize as a stepmom, for my in-laws, my husband's parents, his ex-wife, she was their daughter,
Hmm. Oh
right?
wow.
That was their
Hmm.
experience. And just because they got divorced, it doesn't erase
Change that. Yeah.
all of that relationship.
Mm.
And so I've been in this relationship a long time, 25 years. And my
Wow.
stepson, who's almost 30, he got married a couple of years ago. And so we were all there. And so we're like, what, 50, but a bunch, I don't have any, I didn't count them up, a bunch of people who had known them
Hmm.
from their marriage, from their
Wow.
first
Yeah.
marriage. And it was really interesting because that over this, I've been married 20 some years and people were still saying to me, they were like, wow, it's so nice that you can be so accepting. And I was like, no, but you guys were friends beforehand. I was able to be like, you, even though you're not married to her anymore, you did love her. And I really
Yeah.
respect that and take that seriously.
Hmm.
And so that's the way it doesn't mean that I yes everything and that I love everything, but
Right. Of
that's
course.
this mindset that I try to put myself.
That's amazing. So I know a lot of people ask the question of like when you're blending a family and you're coming in, even whether you have children or at that moment or later, how do you compare that without comparing?
This is one of those things that, so if you're in the situation where have made the commitment, so you're married, you bought a house together, or you had kids together, and you're in the commitment, you've already made the commitment,
Mhm.
the options are different, right? Because you've got the commitment, the decision is there. If that's your situation, it's not super helpful to use difference in the relationship as a scapegoat. right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing I want to say, right? So is there a difference between my relationship between my stepkids and my relationship between my biological kids? Yeah, there probably is, right? My stepkids have another mother and my biological kids do not. And so yes, absolutely. Would I throw myself in front of a bus if my stepkids were about to get run over? Yes. So those things are both true. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing is that if you use the biological relationship as a reason to not work on connection,
Mm-hmm.
you're giving yourself an exit ramp. It's like blaming the person who's not in the room. It's always
Mm-hmm.
going to be there and it gets in the way of working on things that might make it better. There's never a situation where I'm going to wake up and be my stepkid's mom. That's like the
Mm-hmm.
reality of the situation. Even if I was their full-time parent, I didn't grow them inside my body.
Mm-hmm.
But do I want to use that as a reason to be unhappy,
Right.
to create conflict, to do all of those things? Or do I just want to have it be a data point like they have blue eyes? They
Mm-hmm.
have yellow hair, or whatever those things are, and then say, okay, and now what connection do I want? What family situation do I want? All of them. And one of the examples I use is that people adopt children,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And they have beautiful, loving relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that there is a point where, and there's also people who adopt children have very struggling, complicated
Mm-hmm.
relationships, right? In the end of the day, it's, do you want that to be the thing that is what you blame it on, right? Do you want to let that be the criteria? Or do you just want to let it be one factor in your family? There are happily married people, there are miserable married people. There are happy divorced people, there are miserable divorced people. There are happy single
Mm-hmm.
people and very unhappy single people. And so, like, just saying, oh, instead of letting this be the thing I blame all of my emotions on,
Mm-hmm.
how about if I just take a step back and say, okay, what are my choices here and what do I want to
Right.
do?
Right.
Does that make
So,
sense?
yeah, that's amazing. So, with that being said, like with you having to navigate that space, like how did you decide what type of parenting style you wanted to have versus if it was going to be the same or different than the way your stepchildren were being parented?
Oh, that's a really good question. My very first parenting strategy was to not do some of the things that my parents did. That was
Mhm.
where I started.
I think we all
I don't
start there.
necessarily recommend, I'm not sure that's the best place to start, to tell you the truth, but it is a really common place to start, which is
hmm
why I call it out. And I knew that. I was like, okay, my parents did this and I'm never going to do that.
hmm
And now that my youngest is almost 18. So I can look back and realize that many of the things, I have a whole different perspective on why my parents did some of the things they did.
hmm
Because it is one of the funny truisms of life. It's the thing you say you're never going to do as a parent.
End up,
It's
yep.
like you're calling it into your life. It's watch this. I thought my newborn was going to go straight into the other room and sleep all night. No,
I'm never going to do
not.
this. I'm never going to, yeah.
I'm never going to do this. Just watch. Just wait. So that is absolutely where I started. And then because I started as a step parent without kids of my own, I was much more tolerant of just discipline decisions
hmm
and house rules that my husband and his first wife set up. And then when we had kids, because I did that very quickly, and let me tell you, it did not make anything simpler. Then it became more complex. I had much
hmm
stronger opinions. And so that's when that happened. And so if you have two people with kids coming together in a Brady Bunch model, I think it happens earlier than I went
mm
through because you have to deal with it right away.
Right away, yeah.
And so, yeah, you have to deal with it right away. Okay, what time is bedtime? When are they doing
Mhm.
their homework? Who's going to tell them to pick their towels up off the bathroom floor? The answer to that one is everybody, every day from now until the end of the time. Are we going to teach them to do their laundry? Are we going to do it for
hmm
them? Who's going to pay for the sports? All those things come up. And what I have learned in my experience, and just my
hmm
own thing, is that we don't always agree.
Yeah.
We don't always have the same things. I tend to be this is not going to surprise anybody listening. I can be very passionate about the things I want, but I tend to be like studious and I want to like explain everything and tell
hmm
stories.
Yep.
I'm tolerant of other people's ideas where I can be unless they annoy me. And so I think that falls under I always get these mixed up. So we say authoritative, right? That's the one or is that authoritarian? Anyway, they're very similar words. And I also think that depends on, I feel like I can sometimes bounce back and forth
Okay.
between the different styles of parenting, sometimes almost in the same situation. Like I will have a totally different opinion about how much TV to watch on a Tuesday than on a school night than on a
Hmm.
weekend. Or if
Yeah,
somebody's got the
definitely.
flu, if I don't feel well, please turn the
Exactly.
TV on and leave me alone. All of that. So what I have learned is that sometimes we just don't agree, but you still have to find a way forward, right? And
Hmm.
one of the things that I eventually picked up over time was giving people an opportunity, the other parents, an opportunity to explain why something was important to them. Hey,
Good.
you and I are not on the same page with this. Like, I feel it's really important, but you obviously don't. Tell me what's going on. And that's not the way a real actual conversation between two people happens, but generally that's the idea. And I'll give you an example that comes up in a lot of families. One parent, blended and otherwise, one parent might have really strong opinions about academic performance. Like
Hmm.
it's really important that you get
Hmm.
A's and B's. And another parent might not. They just might. That's just not their thing.
Yeah.
And they're disagreeing and they're fighting. And the parent who has real high standards or real high result goals is like, hey, it's as important. We need to do this. And they're just hammering it down and doing it. And the other parent's just not doing it. They might be
Hmm.
nodding or just not engaging and they're just not doing their part in holding it up. And it causes a lot of frustration. And sometimes when you give the other person a chance to talk, it comes out that there's a reason that they don't do it. Maybe they
Hmm.
didn't do very well in school, or they had a sibling who really struggled in school, or they think that school is
Yeah.
ridiculous,
All
like
of
all
that.
of those things,
Mhm.
all of that. And then once their origin story, like
Hmm.
why they're doing it, then you can shift it away from one person like making the designation and try and figure
Hmm.
out how you want to handle it for the kid
Yeah.
because
For
the
that
shift.
kid. Yeah.
What's our goal here and what do we want to do together?
Hmm.
And how do we want to get there? And gosh, I should have kept a tally. If I had known I was going to do this as a living, I should have kept track. There's a lot of times, and this was a thing I had to learn, and I'm sure I didn't learn it on my own. I'm sure somebody taught me, where you hit a point in a discussion where you're able to say, you know what, right now you and I don't agree.
Hmm.
So do we have to take action today? Is there a decision we have to take today? And if so, what? And if not, do
Let's
we want to
table
bring it up
it.
again later?
Mm.
It's the we acknowledge that we don't have
Yeah.
the same opinion. Sometimes these are really some of the places where this gets really heated during lockdown and the pandemic.
Hmm.
If there were parents who didn't agree on vaccines, that's one
Mm.
of the places where I've
Yeah.
really seen
I could
this
see
be
that.
it's a really problematic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are some of the hardest ones to do and it can be really hard.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up because, like, in every family, there are going to be reasons behind actions, right? That's how we are developed. We call that social construction in the therapy world. It's how we are
Yeah.
formed, it's how we're constructed. It's like our society, what we live through, what we understand, how we were raised. All of that has to do with how we see the world. It's our map, right? So we use that as our map. So, of course, we're going to use that. And of course, we're going to say, okay, they need to do X, Y, and Z because this is the map we're viewing and this is the way that we're seeing it,
Yeah.
right? But when you bring another person in and other people in, everybody has their own map. Everybody has their map of how they want to get to X, Y, Z, how they want to get where. Some maps don't even go to the same place, right? We're all like, okay, maybe we're
Yeah.
trying to go here and maybe we're trying to go there, and we have no idea. But just taking the time to ask, like, why is this, can you explain to me why this is important? Because that
Yes.
takes away the defense, right? Because like you said before, you get so protective when people are like challenging why you do something, you feel away. You start to bulk up and you're like, I don't have to explain X, Y, and Z. But if you do it from a place of, no, I really want to know and I'm really curious because I know that this is important to you, takes the guard down, right? That takes it down. And it reminds your partner that we're not opponents. We're on the same team, right? I tell couples that all the time when I'm working in with them, I'm like, you're not opponents. You're on the same team. It's just your map is different. So now we're trying to merge it because so you can know what's best for your kids, so you can decide together. But that's amazing. I often say that all the time. It's just ask them, why is this important?
Yes.
It's
And one
amazing.
of the things, so, and I call it's the invisible. It's you don't even know what your guidebook is because you were unaware when it was being formed, right? And
Hmm.
some of it and some of it you don't. And that's the same on the other side. And I will say that this is elevated when you are blending families because you have the other people too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you a really silly example that shows up in many places. My husband and his kids had assigned seats on the couch, right? They didn't realize it. If you would have asked them, they didn't know. But I didn't know either. And so if I sat in a place where the kids thought was theirs, they were out of sorts. They were like, "Hey, you're in my spot." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, we all sit wherever we do." I didn't realize it, and neither did they. And that's a thing that I've heard in other families too. It's like when so I always tell people, I'm like, it's very hard to insert yourself into somebody else's traditions.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes a more peaceful process to work on creating the newer customs and traditions in the new
Yeah.
family grouping. And it's just a gentle shift that's like that. But the awareness that you have to ask because nobody can read your mind,
Mhm.
and you have to be ready for them to ask you is the other
Right.
part of that. Because sometimes I'm very good at finding out what's going on with other folks. I'm like, hey, why is this important to you? And then when they ask me, I'm like, I don't want to have to defend myself.
How dare
This
you?
in some ways it doesn't work.
Yes, definitely. Like, how dare you turn this back to me and ask me? I don't want to
Right.
explain myself.
I'm just because I say
hmm
so.
What do you know? That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh man, but I think this is so helpful to our listeners. I think that they will get so much out of this. I always try to leave our moms with just one actionable step. So if they find themselves in a situation of considering to blend a family, or if they're already in a blended family and struggling, what is like one actionable thing that they can do to center themselves?
Oh, to center themselves in the moment. If you find yourself in a position of like indecision or overwhelm or confusion with your family, the centering actions are very similar to any time, any place else, right? It's like self-care, not in the
Mhm.
sense of like bubble baths and massages, but making sure that you have a way, and the tools are different for everybody, but have a way to get that quiet space where you can hear yourself think,
Mhm.
to begin to isolate what is really going on and how do I feel versus spinning out in the indecision and the overwhelm and talking to all your friends and getting other people's perspectives. Like,
Yeah.
give yourself space to hear your own voice.
Mhm.
And just the other thing, so we know 4 out of 10 marriages today are remarriages. And so that's a lot of people going
Yeah.
through this. And I share that because people tell me every day that they feel isolated and alone in this. And it's really quite the opposite. So, the reason I am so working on the visibility is
Mhm.
that I felt like I didn't know who to talk to
Yeah.
and I felt isolated. And then I was really surprised that 25 years later, when I said, hey, I'll help people, that people were still feeling that way. I think that's
Mhm.
like really interesting. And you're not alone. There are other people and there are tools and there are lots of people who can help. And so, take a deep breath, probably take three and go from there.
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today. Just let everybody know how they can find you and anything you want to leave them with.
Absolutely. My name is Amy Stone. I name my business Amy Says So, which is a play on that parental thing because I say so.
I love
I don't know if I ever even said that to my kids in anything other than a joke or my stepkids. But so my website is amysaysso.com. And that's the best place to go
Okay.
to get. I do have a podcast called The Amy Says So Show, and I have free resources, including I give away a book, which is the 10 lessons that I think I learned in 20 years of being a step parent. It's a
Okay.
very self-centered Amy book, but it is an introduction into what my experience was and a starting point.
Okay. I'll be sure to make sure I put that link in the show notes so our listeners can find it easily. Thank you so much, Amy. I have enjoyed having you on. I appreciate your time and thank you for being on Momship Mastery.
Thank you.
That's all for today, and I hope that you're feeling inspired to navigate your ships with grace and authenticity. But remember, you don't have to do this alone. Our growing community is here and ready to support you. You can find the link to that one in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, I want you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a mom who may just need a little support and encouragement. Don't forget to connect with us on social media. We are on Instagram and Facebook at Momship Mastery, and those links are also in the show notes. Before we go, here's my little reminder. You are an incredible mom. and you have the power to nurture your inner well-being and create meaningful connections and relationships. Embrace the journey, cherish the moments, and continue to thrive in your momship journey. Until next time.